there a writing craft book on your bedside table? Has it been there for a while?
Do you keep meaning to get past chapter 2 or chapter 1 or just the first page?
Then the Words to Write By podcast is for you. Hi, I'm Renee. I teach composition and creative writing to college students. My background is in poetry, but I'm working on my memoir.
And I'm Kim. I'm trained as a science journalist, but now I'm trying my hand at short fiction. Each week we'll be tackling a chapter of some well-known, but perhaps not so well-read, writing craft book.
Together, we'll uncover brilliant insights, face the hard truths, and totally disagree when the author is wrong.
This is our podcast, after all.
And then we're going to take what we learn and apply it to our own writing
by doing the book's suggested exercises.
We're inviting you to read along, or just tune in for the Cliff Notes version.
We're committed to improving our own craft, one writing advice book at a time, and we'd love for you to join us.
Hello, Words to Write By listeners.
Hello.
How's it going? Oh, wait, they can't reply back, can they? Well, you may be wondering, what other cool stuff might we be up to that we can offer you? Well, we have a Patreon account. Of course we have a Patreon account. And you can get cool stuff. You can get like study guide. What else do we have?
We do bonus episodes every time we read a book. Not every chapter, but often we will give ourselves a challenge to try to use some of the advice in the book ourselves and see how it goes. And some of those we include on the podcast, and some of them we save for extra on our Patreon account.
So if you want to hear how we've tried to tackle a lot of these activities in the books we've read, that is a great place to go.
Yep.
We also have a really cool process group.
Yes, this is through Meetup, and part of the reason we're doing this is we're doing Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, and she talks a lot about process. And so this is a place where writers can come and discuss not their writing specifics, not advice like how is this well written, but other things like, how do I write every day? That's always a favorite. Or what is publishable? Or
can I make money off my writing? That was one. And
yeah.
we were pretty much, the answer was no, you cannot. No, just kidding. But it was a really great discussion, and there was a lot of great resources.
Right, because it's not just us. We actually have several other people that come to the group that are very experienced in different aspects of writing.
And some people do sell their writing.
Yeah.
It's good to talk to other people and hear their experiences. It's just really nice, also because it's kind of lonely being a writer.
And if you're interested in doing it, you can either go through the Meetup app and look for the Words to Write By process group, or you can go to our website and we have a link that you can click there. And also it's on each of our episodes. And in case you just listen to this through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we have a website with lots of cool stuff on it.
Yeah, so the Snark Notes that were on the Patreon for the first 2 books have now switched over to the website. They're free. So if you go to the website, you'll get, it's not quite show notes, but it is about the show. But I really go into depth on this advice. So it's kind of like a part study guide for what we've talked about. Sometimes I'll put examples in there. Almost every time I put examples in there.
And some fun links.
And really fun links. There's also a blog at the bottom called Continuing the Conversation. And at the end of every episode webpage, we've got a discussion that kind of links to what we talked about in the episode. The last one I posted was about beginner's mind. And I've got a whole article on that and an example from an author using that in their writing, and some other really cool resources for writers. So it's not just, oh, here's something we talked about on the podcast, here's a link. There's a link and then there's an article. So go there, get the stuff. I put a lot of work into it. Kim puts a lot of work into it.
Actually, no, the Snark Notes are your work.
Okay, the Snark Notes might be mine, but I use the podcast. I study what we've talked about in the podcast, and I use that to inform it. It is a group project. Kim does all the sound editing, by the way. Like, this is her baby, the podcasting stuff.
And Renee does the writing stuff.
Yeah.
If you are planning on starting your own podcast, I highly recommend having an absolute best friend who you get along with great, and you discuss stuff, and even if you've got different opinions, you still come away happy and productive. And if you have someone like that for the podcast, then you're a long ways to being.
And when Kim finds that person, I love you, Kim. You're my best friend, too. This is awesome. I always feel like she has the harder job, but I think she thinks I have the harder job.
You definitely have the harder job.
And that is like the perfect equilibrium that you want with a podcast partner.
So we are starting a new section of the book. It's called Help Along the Way. So the last couple of sections were all kind of about mental, mind frame ideas. And now we're going to more practical stuff. And there are 2 chapters that we're going to cover today, index cards and calling around. We're going to start with index cards.
It's pretty self-explanatory, right?
Yes.
Lamott has index cards. She keeps them around and she writes notes on them.
Yes, and she always keeps one in her back pocket wherever she goes, along with a pen, so she can write stuff down like
Pammy Demi Moore.
So Pammy Demi Moore then unspools in this book with this conversation she had with a friend who was dying of cancer. The friend says, "I'm actually quite depressed," she said. "I don't see why. What's the silver lining here? I can't seem to remember today." The silver lining is that you're not going to have to see any more naked pregnant pictures of Demi Moore.
That's pretty good.
So that was the note card she wrote down, and that's the memory that it brings up. And Lamott's basic take is that we forget stuff.
Right. She had to write the words Pammy Demi Moore on a note card so that she could remember this whole scene.
Mm-hmm.
Note that she is not writing the whole scene on the note card. Do you do this? Do you have note cards everywhere?
No, I have a journal, a composition book that I do writing in. Since I am starting ideas for my next book, because I finished writing my novel.
Wait. We need to talk about that for a second. So
Okay.
this is a big part of our podcast. Part of the reason we do this podcast is to keep us honest. That's what we started, right?
Right.
We have to work on our own work, and we're writing a draft behind the scenes of this podcast. And Kim reached a milestone.
Yes, I finished the fantasy novel that I had been working on for the past probably year and a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
It's 118,000 words.
Woohoo!
And it needs a little bit of proofreading and a couple little short edits, but it is good to go. And I started sending it out to agents this week.
She started sending it out to agents.
Yeah.
To me, that's huge. Huge. Congratulations, Kim.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I wish there was like a soundbite we could throw in there, like, wee, like people clapping and yes! Oh my God, that was amazing. I can't believe you just did that.
We have sound bites.
We have sound bites. Yes. Do that one again. Yay! Anyway,
So now I've got to think of what the next story is going to be. And I have been keeping in my composition book, as I've been working on the current novel, writing notes in the back of it. So I have them for when I get done with the composition book. I transfer all those ideas into my manuscript Bible on my computer so it is accessible. So I know that I will forget these things. This covers the stuff that I come up with when I'm sitting down to write. Note cards would be for every random bits.
do you feel like you've been out shopping or whatever and then had a great idea and you wish you'd written it down, but you didn't?
You know, I haven't yet got old lady's brain. I feel like a lot of that stuff is in my mind. What I find delightful is when I've written something and I put it away and I find it. I'm like, oh, I wrote this. This is nice. But I don't know if that you get the same thrill from a note card.
There's this quote in the text. I actually specifically wanted to ask Kim because she's had children. And it says, when a child comes out of your body, it arrives with about a fifth of your brain clutched in its little hand, like those babies born clutching IUDs. So is this a thing?
Only for the first one, because then you're gone anyway. No, I will say that before my first son was born, I took a class in statistics, and it has gone completely out of my mind. I've never really been able to pick it up, even though I should be able to pick it up. And I do blame the fact that I had a child afterwards, and so that's why I lost it all. Let's see, what else does she... I mean, it's one of those things that it has a chapter, and it's pretty straightforward. It's got a lot of good quotes in it.
Yeah, I mean, she's got different reasons, and again, they're embedded. Like, the reasons aren't outright stated, because there's a lot of fluff. I guess there's only so much one could say about index cards. She writes a note, but there's a whole story behind that note. And then she actually tells us the story associated with that note, which I guess is helpful for figuring out what exactly you would write down.
I think that's one of those areas where you have to trust that the author is not bullshitting you, because you could totally retrofit this chapter based on, I know this thing that happened. I know it very well. And I can write down the things, and then I'll say I had it on a note card.
She also doesn't use all of them. She's got some that are old. They are stapled to her manuscript, which I think is kind of cool. She's got ones just laying around. She has this really cool part at the end where she talks about when she dies, what her son will find.
Other cards just sort of live with me in little piles and drifts. My son will probably have to deal with them someday after my death. They are my equivalent of cats that those nutty Bouvier aunts own. But my cards do not smell or shed or go wee-wee on the floors. And I think Sam should be aware that he's getting off easy. So I'm imagining if I were to put this in practice that I would have just little cards everywhere and would drive everybody else crazy.
There was this dude, I should actually look this up and put it on the website. So there's this thing called the Zettelkasten. It's German, of course. Yes, it is German. This dude, he wasn't even a professor before he came up with this method. But with this method of note-taking, using note cards, he got his PhD, and then he wrote an incredible amount of papers, like tons and tons and tons of these articles that were published. And what he did was he pretty much came up with his own tagging system. He would write his idea or note. It was always based on something he was reading. He would read something, he'd write a note, he'd write the quote that it came from on the note card, and then the bibliographical information. He had a category of different card catalog for a library, and then he'd put it in there. And then other related items would go with it. Anyway, he was able to make associations between ideas that wouldn't normally be so obvious because he had this incredible system. And you can go online and look it up, Zettelkasten, and there's different people who've
Modified it and changed it and marketed it.
put it online. You can do it online. I tried it, the note-taking supreme me. And you know what? I put a lot of work into something that I just didn't really use.
A lot of it is worth trying what someone says, giving it a good shot, and then deciding if it works for you or not, because different people's brains work differently. And we talk about this at the end, but I think a really good exercise for ourselves this week is to try her method. Specifically, the always have a note card and pen with you so that you can jot stuff down. It's going to be especially useful because you're going camping this weekend. I'm going to San Francisco. I was thinking to do this when I have a regular week where I just sit at my desk all week really wouldn't be effective. But we are going to both be going and traveling, and we can see if that collection of note cards we get is actually useful. Okay, so then the next chapter is calling around. And what this amounts to is if you're not sure about something, rather than letting it stump you, you should ask somebody how to do it.
So this is a time travel chapter to the 90s.
This is back before Reddit.
Well, it's back before the internet.
Yeah, she talks about being on her computer, but not the internet.
Right, and she talks about her phone. It doesn't mean smartphone.
No.
It actually means a phone that's meant to be a phone. Like, I don't know why we even call these phones, because they're not. They're computers in our pocket. But a phone used to be like it had one function.
Yes.
And this is the phone she's talking about.
Yes, so the actual technology has changed radically because at this point, if I needed to know what, in her example, the wire cap on a champagne bottle was, I would look it up online.
Right. You wouldn't have to call somebody to figure it out.
You wouldn't have to call someone.
So in the very beginning, she says, what is this chapter about? Essentially, she says there are a number of people out there with invaluable information to share with you, and all you have to do is pick up the phone.
And you basically just change that to say, all you have to do is ask Google.
But you're going to miss out on stuff, and we'll explain what. I think you miss out on stuff. So what were you going to say?
Well, we start with the elephant in the room. Why isn't the internet a replacement for this?
Okay, so her story was that she was thinking of vineyards and opening up a champagne bottle, and there's that little wire thingy that they call the wire thing. Everyone calls it the wire thing, but it's got to have a real name. But she doesn't think to figure out what it is or how to do it until she decides that she wants to write about it. So she's going to call somebody. She's going to call this vineyard out in Russian River in California and ask them, what is this thing called, this wire thing? And instead, she gets a call from her friend and picks up the phone, and they start talking about this very thing about wine and winery and grapes. And then he goes, hey, grapes are awesome. Isn't nature great? They make this beautiful orb thing that's so irresistible for animals to just eat. And then the seeds go into their belly and then they poop them out and then they make more beautiful orbs. And this is like a really cool process in the world, right? So she has that conversation. Then she eventually calls up.
So she talks about, I finally got through to the winery's receptionist and told her what I needed. She said she always just thought of it as the wire thing too. So she transferred me to a 2,000-year-old monk. At least this is how he sounded like, faint, reedy, out of breath, like Noah after a brisk walk. And he was so glad I called. He actually said so, and he sounded like he was. I have secretly believed ever since that he had somehow stayed alive just long enough to be there for my phone call, and that after he answered my questions, he hung up, smiled, and keeled over. The answer is it's a wire hood.
It's called a wire hood, yes. So part of this, she says, is part of your writing. Like, if you're sitting there every day and trying to write 300 words or 1,000 words, all of this calling around is actually part of the work. But that work, it adds up into knowing a bit about how wineries work. It knows a bit about wine, a bit about grapes, a bit about nature and a recollection of nature and its process. All of those ideas and connections would not have taken place if you just typed into Google, what's that wire thingy on a champagne bottle? You'd get your answer, but you wouldn't get all of this stuff.
But you might get back to writing the rest of the day, as opposed to, I was looking at what she actually did that day, and she did not do much writing.
Well, wait, it says experiences that she has that gives her the not only fuel to write, but also the stuff to write about.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Where do your ideas come from? You eventually run out, right? Or they're just not as good. A lot of writers say to go out into the world.
Go out to the world and find out what the little wire thingy is different than, like, I go out and join a surfing club.
Yeah. You know what I miss? I miss about the 90s? I miss the coffee shops. I spent a good deal of time, hours upon hours, just sitting at a cafe, having rando conversations with people. Because no one had a phone to distract them, and you had to, entertain yourself some way. And I don't want to say we don't do that anymore, because I've still done that. I still go to a cafe and I'll have a conversation. But
mostly you pull out your laptop and start working.
yeah, I miss those 90s cafes. I've ranted about this before.
Do you think that people would get excited if someone called them out of the blue and asked them a question?
Yeah.
You don't think they'd be weirded out?
Maybe that's a generation question. That's something you should ask your kids. I don't think so. If somebody called me, Renee, I need help on blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh my God, I'm useful.
If somebody called me and I didn't actually identify the phone number, I wouldn't pick up.
I don't think you're calling complete strangers.
Well, she was.
Well, she called a winery and there was a secretary. So there's that phone number. There, of course, it's a business. Actually, Kim, you do contact people. You interview for our podcast. You cold call people.
No, I email them.
Uh-huh.
And then I set something up.
What about a cold email?
Oh, cold emails are fine.
But before we had email,
We had phones.
and that's what they did. And you picked up. You know why? Because we didn't have so many telemarketers.
Yes.
There weren't as many scams calling us.
Back in the day, you couldn't actually tell the number that was calling you. So it could have been your mother for all you knew.
Could we say that this calling around chapter could be updated to texting?
Yeah, I think this one could definitely use some modern technology aspects added to it.
So I wrote a note on the bottom, speaking of note cards, and I wrote, following the breadcrumbs of a phrase or a definition can give you lots of material, not always just about you versus the page.
Yes, but I think you have to recognize that it's really easy to spend an entire day looking up a small factoid and following the breadcrumbs and not actually get something written.
There's a book, I don't know if you've read it, which is about that, called The War of Art.
I have a copy of it.
It's a good book, and that is one we definitely have to do for a process.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe like 4 books from now, because we've already got a few picked out for the next few seasons.
We're good for years. Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The person in it, Pressfield, I think his name is, he's like, at what point is what you're doing writing, and at what point is what you're doing a distraction?
Yes.
because she's talking about this calling around as a break. And as writers, we need a break. You can burn yourself out.
Yes, that's true. If you're narrow focused on your writing the whole time, it's not going to be as good. You're right. Part of the breadth and the charm of writing is our experiences we bring to it. Even more in today's age of ChatGTP and Bard, bringing the human element, stuff that we experienced ourselves as opposed to something we read on the internet and regurgitate into a particular phrase, is going to be what we bring to writing.
Yeah. When you just use Google, it's a shortcut. That shortcut cut out life, interaction with other people, and coming up with ideas.
Now, going on Reddit and making a post about it, that can be useful.
I would put quotes around useful. Totally depends. So actually, didn't you post something on Reddit recently?
Yeah, I wanted to know, if you had characters that had never killed someone in a battle, how could you handle that without it being like the entire giant story arc of the book? And I got a lot of responses. So
Did you get some good responses?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And, in the idea of meandering and getting different people's takes, I would say that thread was a lot of useful meandering as well.
So like a thread, a chat thread, like on Reddit, if they're saying good stuff, you can simulate this phone conversation thing in this chapter. Andy Weir, they wrote Hail Mary. Any Hail Mary fans out there? Oh, there's got to be. Because that book, have you read that book?
Not yet.
He is perfecting the art of the page turner. Holy hell, that book is fun. So there's this book by Andy Weir, and he apparently is notorious for researching the hell out of all the stuff that he puts in these books. He's also the guy who wrote The Martian. And I saw on Reddit that somebody had posted an anonymous question that linked exactly to something that happened in the book, getting expert opinion on things that would happen for, what if we're in space and this thing breaks? How would this get fixed or whatever? And the answer was in the book. And I'm like, okay, yeah, technically that may not be Andy Weir, but his history, he used the internet and other people on the internet to help him workshop his stuff and come up with accurate scientific stuff. I think that's awesome. Talk about scrappy. So that you're kind of doing an Andy Weir thing.
I suppose so. And I definitely often ask questions. And one of the things that the search engine will bring up is a set of Reddit replies that are similar to it. And I'll actually follow the Reddit questions because I get lots of different inputs on those.
Right. I would be careful. Maybe this is not even something we should talk about.
Probably not something we should talk about.
Okay.
But keep going.
Okay. There's a lot of crap on the internet. Like so much crap. Like I have tried to do research on like finding things for the blog posts at the end of our show notes. I can't find anything sometimes. I'm like, it's just one big ad. And even if you go onto writing websites, like certain blogs and stuff are going to teach you how to write a story arc and all this other stuff, it's the same stuff over and over again. And they use the same damn examples of Harry Potter and Star Wars over and over and over again. I'm like, this is stupid. Like, give me something real. I have a really hard time finding real advice, real good advice on the internet, but I get good stuff in books. And I'm so glad, at least I was in the generation that I was, that I will rely on books to give me this stuff, because that's where the stuff is. The good stuff is there. If it's free, there's a reason, except for our website, because our website's cool. But I really do give good stuff. Yes. I try to anyway, because I'm so against there being intellectually vapid crap.
I think one of the issues is how to get to primary sources on the internet, because it's so easy to get to a secondary source that's summarizing something that is higher up on your search terms. Actually, one of the great things I found on the show notes is when you've linked videos of interviews with authors and they're discussing various points. I think those are a nice resource.
Yeah, and those are becoming harder to find. But one of my tactics is finding authors talking about things like their process and all that. And what I do is I'll go into YouTube and I'll type library channel or something like that. A lot of libraries will do authors reading. And then they'll record them. And then they have their whole author series, or colleges will also do it. And you go find the college channel. So you can get good stuff. But it's like linked in the traditional manner. You got to find libraries.
Because librarians keep track of things.
Yeah, they're trying to do a service for people. Like, this was a very valuable talk and they want other people to see it. But if you type in how to write a story arc or whatever, you're going to get vlog after vlog after vlog
of people that are just generating content. And I say this as a person that is generating content. However,
I know it's weird, right? We're like, we are actually generating content.
But yeah, the primary sources are trickier to find.
They are trickier to find. Anyway.
Calling around for primary sources.
Well, so now there's this calling around thing. How are you going to find this human interaction?
Yeah.
To come up with new ideas online and chatting.
Yep. On the other hand, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
True. You can also come to our process group.
We could discuss this at our process group.
I have one last question. Have you actually written notes and actually used them? Do you actually use the notes that you take?
So here's my deal. If I write something down, it stays in my head better. Like I said, I do have these notes that I have for future stories, and I will go to them. But part of it's just the act of writing it down helps clarify it in my mind.
So even if you don't remember you wrote the note, you'll remember the idea.
Yeah.
I think I have the same thing going on. I do a lot of writing and thinking. Like, that's how I think.
Yeah, because nobody wants to talk to me about it.
Aw, you can always text me, Kim.
I could always text you.
Did you find these chapters useful?
I wouldn't buy a book for these chapters.
Right. So if they were missing.
Probably wouldn't notice.
Interesting. Yeah.
However, the other thing this book is it's her saying how she does and writes stuff. And for someone that hadn't thought about doing note cards, index cards, this could be the aha moment. This is getting into how Anne Lamott writes. And I think it's valid for her to put all the aspects of how she writes in her writing book.
That's true. It is her writing book, and these are part of her process, and they're very important for her for index cards and for calling other people. So I suppose, yes.
And they're short chapters.
Sort of. They're longer than they need to be. The index card one is really long.
Okay, I think we're going to call that for our episode. And as we mentioned before, our exercise is going to be to carry around a note card and a pen at all times and to pull it out and write down little notes or big notes or whatever. And then we will talk about what we got out of it after a week's time.
Or maybe take one and elaborate on them.
Something, yeah.
We'll do something cool.
Okay, so that's our project, and we'll be back soon.
See ya.
And we're back after about a week of trying Anne Lamott's index cards method.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your stuff first? Or
Yeah, sure. In this episode, we'll talk about my stuff. And then if you would like to hear Kim's note cards and her method and what she got out of it, go to our Patreon and you'll get the bonus episode.
So, Renee, I have my index cards on the table here, but you have any index cards?
Cheated. Of course. Just paper. I mean, I'm really big fan of analog. A big fan of paper. But I went camping this weekend.
And so you were out in nature and you only had your cell phone?
Well, Hurricane Hillary caused it to rain in torrents up in Lake Tahoe. So we kind of got rained out, but we didn't leave. It was just rain, 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 rain. So bringing paper out there, I did. Actually, I had a lot of paper, but it never left the car.
Uh-huh.
It was kind of a fun adventure. We had canopies up and everything. We were with a couple of friends, and it just started raining so hard that the rain started bleeding through the canopy. And then it flooded the area. And then we're like, let's go to the bar about 10 minutes away. And if it doesn't let up, we're going to go to a hotel.
Okay. All right. So did you go to a hotel then?
No, it cleared up enough for us to come back and go to sleep. But it rained all night. And luckily the tent held up.
I will say that when there's bad weather for camping, if you can be out someplace before that's dry and has alcohol and good food and you just go back to the tent, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, it was actually really fun. I'm glad I did it. But if you told me it was going to rain the whole time, I don't know if I would have gone. But that is why it's on my phone.
Okay. So how did you use your phone to proxy for index cards?
Well, she said just write a note down. You know, that might trigger a memory or a note to self about a thing. And so I just texted those things to myself. Instead of having it on a note card with a pen, it was in my phone.
So, it's still in your phone?
It's still on my phone.
Did you actually text to Renee?
Yeah, saved messages. Do you use Telegram?
No, I don't use.
It's awesome. But yeah, they call them saved messages, but they're just to yourself. I mean, I could text it to myself using the texting app, but I prefer Telegram. I text a lot of things to myself. I have comics in here, videos. All right, so the first note to self sounds ridiculous. Mom cake.
Okay.
Frosted in different quantities. Frosted in BS.
So did you just write mom cake, or you wrote mom cake frosted in different?
Sorry, I misread it. Mom cake layered in different quantities, frosted in BS.
You're a poet, aren't you?
I guess so, yeah, it might be a thing. I was going to make a cake for my friend's birthday, and I was thinking of the cake, and she wanted raspberries and fresh cream and chocolate and dark chocolate, and I was like, all right, how am I going to assemble this? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, it's so interesting about Mom, because like all people, she was complicated. Since that's the focus of my book now, I was like having a hard time trying to explain joy, because I'm not saying there wasn't a lot, but I don't know if there was. It's easy to write about trauma. It's hard to write about when things were good. It made the good seem like a drug, because it was like, oh God, we finally made it. Things are going to be great. And then they're not. And so I thought, oh, that'd be an interesting metaphor in the book if I talked about the mom cake. And mom was like a cake. It's like some of it's sweet and some of it's good. But man, it's still frosted and bullshit.
So was this note like you were just thinking about it and floating around your head? At certain points you realized this is an idea for my memoir. I need to write it down. Or was it you came up with the mom cake note and then you riffed on it in your own head afterwards?
I think Max was driving and I was just thinking about it. I was just like, oh, mom cake, interesting. I'm like, oh, that would maybe be a good metaphor in the book. And then I went, oh, I should write it down. And then I continued on with the metaphor a little bit about being layered and then having frosting. And then I was like, okay. And I thought about it a little bit more. And I go, nope, that note's good. That's enough. That's all I need. And I'll remember it. I don't know if I'll ever use it. Talking about it right now, it seems a little tacky, I guess. I don't know if I would write. I might. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see.
It's a note.
It's a note.
And you don't need to read all of them, but do you have any other ones that you think illustrate the technique very well or very badly?
One of them was, so I was not treated well in school. So all those people who were not treated well in school, hey, it wasn't great for me. I guess I just have kind of a fun, wild personality, and that didn't do well with others. But one thing that I remember people used to tell me, like once I left high school, and I would say, yeah, it was pretty bad. And they would say, you know what? Just know that those experiences made you a better person. And so I wrote, quote, made me a better person, unquote, like I needed to be destroyed to be good.
Did it just pop in your head and you want to remind yourself that this is something people tell you?
I was thinking about workshop and how, like, it's so hard to write about this stuff. You feel like a victim and you're like, oh, I don't want to write about it. Oh, it makes you feel icky writing about these things. And I thought, but it would be interesting to not focus on those things so much, but maybe focus on people's reactions, what people told you. So I thought, well, maybe I'll write about this. I wrote that note, made me a better person, how utterly empty that is.
So did you then use that for your writing assignment for class, or it was just something that kind of was in your head and you just want to make sure it was down somewhere?
I have like this obsession where I'm constantly thinking about the book and trying to think of like how these memories are going to be played out, how I'm going to write about them. It's kind of annoying. Well, this was a new idea where I was like, well, how am I going to write about this? I need a way in to the topic. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm doing about it all wrong. Maybe instead of focusing just on the trauma, I should focus on people's reactions to the trauma. And then it could be maybe an essay if it doesn't even make it to the book. It was just an idea. It popped into my head and went, this would be interesting to write about, is people's reaction to other people's trauma and the shitty things they say.
Now, if you weren't doing your modified index cards approach this week, what would you have done with that idea? Where would it have gone?
I would have thought, oh, that's a good idea, and then not written it down, and then not thought about it for a while. Sometimes those thoughts stick with me, and sometimes they don't. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I tell myself maybe it wasn't worth, I think Anne Lamott mentioned that, maybe it wasn't worth it if I didn't remember it, but I probably wouldn't have thought about it so deeply and like tried to like figure out a use for it instead of me just going, oh, that was just a neat idea, passing thought, but not something I would pursue.
So the act of actually writing it down gave it more importance for you to follow up on it, you think?
Yes, but also talking about it and like looking at. So it's not just writing the note down, because I used to have copious amounts of notes everywhere. It's actually rereading them. So this activity of us discussing the things we wrote down, I think, are helping me like thread the pieces together a little bit better.
The other idea behind the note cards is her idea of you to stick one with a pen in the back pocket so you can grab it whenever. And obviously a cell phone is pretty much that because it's always there. But did you find having someplace to record it in the moment made a difference?
I don't know, because I haven't pursued any of the ideas yet. Like I haven't started writing about them yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I know they're in the phone, and I know they're very easily accessible, and I don't have to like look for them that hard. So I'm not sure. Hopefully they do. And if they don't lead to anything, at least that thought will lead to another thought. Mm-hmm. That's what free writing's all about.
Okay. So would you recommend this method to somebody, or who would you recommend this method to?
I don't know. I think everyone should try it. Everyone should try it, and if it's your jam, it's your jam. And if it's not, then you know what? There's plenty of other process activities you can do to help yourself. This isn't going to hurt anyone. One thing I would worry about is getting buried in notes. I used to be buried in notes. One day I was like, I'm throwing them all away, and I did. I just threw them all away. I was like, well, clearly I didn't need them because I haven't looked at them, and they were actually causing me stress. So
okay. I think we'll wrap it up there for the day. And thank you all for listening to our podcast. Check out our Patreon account to hear the bonus episode where I explain how I handled the index card situation. And see you in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Adam. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
there's only 3 parts, of course. No, part 4, publication and other reasons to write. So there are 4 parts. Nope, scratch that. There are part 5. So let me start over.